Welcome to the David Lott Show, where we guide elite entrepreneurs from earthly success to eternal significance. Hey, can you help us grow? Please like, comment, and subscribe to our content.
Today we're talking about stewardship versus modern wealth building. And I think maybe for the general person who isn't a Christian, they might have questions about what stewardship is. But for the Christian entrepreneur, they probably have a general sense of what stewardship is versus what modern wealth building is. I think the
Or just wealth building.
Or just wealth building. Sure. And you know how it's been for, at least 100 years with our stock market and the way that, money and finance works in the United States. We've maybe fallen into a pattern of how things should look. But the Bible and God shows us a different path. So I'm interested to see where the conversation goes today. Let's talk about that difference and maybe, the middle ground in between those two things and how we can utilize resources to grow God's kingdom. So tell me about when you first thought about the difference between how to build wealth in the world's eyes versus how to build and steward wealth in God's eyes.
I think you have to say that would start with tithing, because that for sure goes against pay yourself first. Instead of, taking something, a finite resource, and just throwing it away. Why would you do that? Why would you set yourself back? Think about all the lost compounding and, on and on and on and on. And so I think that has to be where it starts. And over time, maybe that is a crutch too. So like, it is the starting point, but it also can be, oh, well, I'm doing enough, or the rest is mine. So it isn't just a one and done situation, but it is that first step of obedience that God can honor and respond to.
That's good. If the world's economy runs on this idea of accumulation and building it up, God's economy runs on stewardship, living with open hands, right? Being generous, living a generous life. Where do those two worlds collide most in an ordinary person's financial life?
The need to accumulate comes out of a need of scarcity. There is some wisdom in it, just like everything. There's kind of, polar ends of the spectrum, like kind of hoard and just be a fool and just kind of let things go, not take responsibility. And I think that where they collide is that God's kingdom is eternal. The world's view of wealth is always over some time horizon that is usually in a lifetime that they can be in touch with, either theirs or their kids or maybe their grandkids. Probably not any further than that. So all of the strategies are temporal, and I have to do it as fast as I can because I only have so much time. And also looking at things as finite resources, that I need to get as much as I can of this finite thing that's out there. And in effect, take it away from somebody else, because there's only so much and I need to get as much as I can. And in doing so, I have to take it away from somebody else. Where God, He is abundant life, living water. There's a well that never runs dry. And we're storing things up for eternity. And so it's a combination of actual dollars built or spent and spiritual battles that we're waging, that do have eternal significance. So I think that there's not the same rush component to walking with the Lord when it comes to managing wealth.
Yeah, that's good. The world tells you that you have to get it done fast, that you have to achieve this financial freedom, if you will, by a certain point so that you can take control of all the cards of your life, that you get to choose when and where you do things, who you say yes to, who you say no to. It's all up to you. And it almost feels like this idea of stewardship biblically is less about money and more about holding on to that control. Do you think there's been times in your life where you've had to battle that and, almost wage war against this sin of needing to have control all the time?
I think part of it is just wanting to kind of be like God. This chase after a life of leisure where everybody works for me and I don't have to do anything kind of puts you on par with at least old world views of what, gods were or gods was, where, humanity served these gods, which is very different from the Bible, where we co-create and are co-workers with and are created in God's image. We're not his slaves.
And Jesus said he came to serve, not to be served. So that's
right.
totally different.
That's right. So I think that, a lot of the rush stems from this desire that if I can get to that life of leisure and luxury, then I'll be happy. But God created us to work. He created us in his own image to reflect his glory. And part of the way that we do that is work. And so it's not a surprise that a lot of people, when they retire or they move on to this life of leisure, lose their identity. Not that people's identity should be necessarily in their job, but having a purpose through work and contributing and taking, the Bible describes the raw materials that existed at the formation of the world. And it was man's job to go into that rainforest, let's just say. There haven't been rain yet, but just for the illustration. And, subdue it, make something creative out of it, bring order to all this kind of raw potential. And, the devil has led us down this thought pattern that, just like he did in the garden, hey, if you know what God knows, then you could be like God. Oh, well, if you don't have to work and you can just sit back and everybody serves you, then you could be like God. It's always a twisted view of how we were intended to be happy.
That's good. And it feels like it's so normalized that it almost feels weird if people aren't working towards this goal of financial freedom so that they can do X, Y, Z with their time, with the people they want to spend time with. So it's tricky because I see a lot of people in the Christian world that, they fall into this blend of, I'm here to serve God, but also it'd be kind of nice to not have to answer to people. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting topic. You are reading a book right now called Enduring Wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And when people hear that title, they might jump to the conclusion that enduring wealth is about building wealth that lasts from generation to generation.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the viewer what this book is. That's not the accurate view of what this book is. Talk to me about the overarching idea behind the narrative.
Yeah, I think that the narrative looks something like God gives certain people, and frankly, many people, the ability to generate income or generate wealth. And that may be through just, raw talent. It may be through education. It may be through all these different sorts of things. And, a lot of people would say, okay, well, that's not the biggest gift. The biggest gift is if you actually get rich and, you can accumulate. But what the book says is that actually the true gift is even if it all goes away, you can create it again. And the reason that God made us that way is so that we can resource his kingdom. And his kingdom is, how can we bring as many people on earth as possible into a surrendered posture where God can co-work with them to take the raw potential of earth and help humankind flourish. And so enduring wealth is this concept of actually using the economic engine that God has made you capable of generating and using that to add to and support what's happening and what God's doing and building the kingdom, and maybe not only do so in a way that is pulling from the resources of the kingdom. Yeah. And so we all know that we can't take it with us. So what are the things that we can do, even in a worldly context, that may have relevance 1,000 years from now? Mm-hmm. Certainly it can't be something that's directly going to benefit us because, I'm 41. I'll be lucky to be around another 50 years. So certainly it can't be something that's going to directly benefit me or my children or my grandchildren or my great-grandchildren. And pretty soon I'm going to be forgotten. So enduring wealth is the idea that if we can co-work and partner with God, then we can take ownership of the responsibility that he has bestowed on us through our time, talent, and treasure to go in and create lasting value that is for the good of humanity. And by so doing, reflect his character.
It's good. So with that preamble, we're going to go through the 6 core practices of what the author talks about in regards to becoming a godly steward.
Yeah.
So take us through, we'll go one by one. The first one is adopting an eternal mindset. As a Christian, I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but talk to us about adopting an eternal mindset.
I think adopting an eternal mindset is as simple as coming to the realization and acknowledgement that at some day I'm going to have to stand before the creator of all things and explain myself. That is a very sobering reality, especially for a rich person, and especially to one who much has been given: time, talent, treasure, etc. And we're going to have to say, well, why did you do that for yourself as opposed to doing that for somebody else? Why did you build the company more instead of building to your children? Why did you cut corners to get somewhere faster? Like all these things we're going to have to account for. And the starting point, I believe, of having an eternal mindset is getting ready to have that conversation and knowing that every decision you make, especially when it comes to your wealth and all these resources you've been given, you're going to have an answer for. And I think as you do that and you kind of come to that fear of God, which Proverbs says is the beginning of wisdom, then you start to maybe pursue to understand God more. And as you do that, you understand that God actually wants to have a relationship with you and that you were built to be in partnership with him with all these things he's bestowed upon you. And in so doing, you realize that God actually loves you and he loves all of us. And he's trying to create something good, but he can't do that when all you're doing is thinking about yourself. And so over time, you realize, wait a minute, this is all God. He loves me and he gave me all this. And he's trying to bless me. And he wants me to be blessed personally by the gifts that he's given me. And also he wants me to bless others. So I think it starts, beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. And I think that as you get to know God and you build relationship, then you move kind of towards this idea of partnership and then stewardship. But stewardship in the Bible, Jesus also talks about the steward knows that he better be on his game because when the master returns, he's going to want to see that house in order. And we don't know when he's coming back.
Yeah. Those two things you brought up, the standing before God and answering for your decisions, and then not knowing when Jesus is coming back. Those are very sobering things to remember that at any point, Jesus can come back and or we pass away, we're going to be standing before God, answering for those decisions that you did or did not make. So to really have that be on my mind is a challenge, but it's also a good reminder, I need to be cognizant of every decision that I make because it does have eternal impact.
It's so interesting. So many successful entrepreneurs have really figured out accountability. We read a book called Extreme Ownership early in our journey that was written by Navy SEALs that talked a lot about, creating an entrepreneurial mindset throughout the chain of command, understanding the commander's intent so that everybody can be a leader and everyone being accountable to their own decision making. And I think for many leaders who have not adopted a kingdom mindset, they're all about accountability. They're all about people being accountable to their decisions. And maybe they would say something like, and I'm accountable to myself. That right there is a very dangerous statement or thought process because now you've elevated yourself to basically God. If there's nothing above you that you're accountable to and you're accountable to yourself, wow, that's a sobering thought. Do you really want to identify yourself as God? That's a scary place to be.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of anxiety lives there too, right? Because there's something in the back of your mind that tells you you're not the one that is in control of all this. So there's something you're going to be answering to. I think that's a really challenging, thought perspective to give people.
Go walk through mountains and tell me that you're only accountable to yourself. I mean, that's just foolishness.
Yeah.
Well, the fool says in their heart, there is no God. There's another proverb.
Yeah. It's a good one. Okay. Second core practice. This one's a little bit less obvious probably to the viewer. Build economic engines. What does it mean to build economic engines in light of this enduring wealth idea?
My journey in that thought process is that I thought my role was to create for-profit revenue or for-profit value, essentially create a profit in business that I could give to somebody else to spend to build God's kingdom, who was, telling people about Jesus full time. That's kind of a weird thing to think about because truly I could spend money to build God's kingdom too. I don't have to give it to somebody else just because they're a pastor or they run a church or whatever. Like they don't have a holier ability to spend my money than I do. And part of that is driven by non-for-profit donations going further, right? Because especially when you're in a high income tax bracket, you could spend about twice as much money if you do it in a pre-tax manner. But recently, a couple of things have happened in the last 12 months for me. Number one, I found out that through certain organizations, you can actually use pre-tax charitable gifts to invest in nonprofit companies. That's an interesting concept. Even particularly for-profit startups that might really need the help. And secondly, with an economic engine, my heart is changing is how can I encourage and equip more ministries to take Paul's perspective, which, hey, I ran a tent building business, not to take resources from the kingdom, but to only add to. And I think that that's a very American concept, especially we were founded on small government. We were founded on, principles of I never am going to take money from the government. I'm always going to stand on my own 2 feet. And yet Christianity has taken almost a socialistic view of, how we build the kingdom, which is, this idea where we get a negative 100% return every year by giving to nonprofits, which obviously there's a place for. But I think oftentimes that mindset in isolation just leads to mediocrity. Because what are you accountable to if you know that you're going to spend all the money and there is going to be no return? There is going to be no creation of value. Or sustainable value. So that is kind of what economic engines to me are designed to create. They're designed to create a motor that can create output that is used to build God's kingdom. Maybe that's an adjacent business to a nonprofit that fuels it. Maybe it is just me on my own being able to build into, which of course I do, nonprofits and for-profits for the glory of God. But how can we create, not destroy is a strong word, but how can we build God's kingdom, build the wealth of God as opposed to drawing it down?
Filling up the gas tank rather than continuously pulling from and using it.
I'll just put an exclamation point on the fact that more Christians need to be pushing their churches and nonprofit partners to have more for-profit mindsets. And I think that will get us away from so many charities doing the same thing when maybe one's really good and there's a bunch of others that are doing the same thing that are mediocre, where they could either pull together and be more effective, or maybe some of them need to go away so that the best can be more resourced. I mean, that sounds bad, but what was the parable of the talents? The parable of the talents is the guy buried in the sand. Well, at least he could give it back to the master instead of having spent it all. And what did he do? The master took it from the guy who buried it and gave it to the guy who was the most productive. So that is a kingdom thought process. And I think that there is waste happening. We have to figure out how can we be more resourceful in being able to create engines that create value and not just absorb it.
Yeah. Speaking of engines, you have built what is now Kerux Financial. It's your financial investment firm. Do you feel, though, that this is an economic engine that you have built in light of God's eternity. And that leads into the third point, which is converting earthly assets into kingdom capital. Talk to me about how your experience with Kerux relates to this point.
Kerux is 1000% a ministry, an economic engine and ministry. And the reason that it is that, and I know that, is because we've taken made decisions that were not only financially motivated to try to promote God's truth. And I really view the economic engine that Kerux is creating in terms of the value that it's adding to the kingdom in threefold. A, it's how we guide clients towards true abundant living and prosperity, which is through finding out why are they here and using their resources to align around that purpose. Two, it's by spending significant time, which you also benefit from, in discipling our team into how can they understand their calling and their gifting and how can they walk in that more deeply so they can not just affect our business more positively, but also affect everybody in their life more positively. And maybe down the road, go out and create, more fruit, more disciples. And thirdly, the profits of the business, of course, go to help my family and also significantly go to building the kingdom. And, maybe this is crazy to say this, but just popped in my head and I'll just take a risk. I got 7 children that I'm also trying to disciple in the same way and build a next generation of people who love God and love people are trying to build the kingdom. And so when my family's resourced, I'm resourcing the kingdom also as I go out and try to multiply the earth and subdue it. And so I think our entire mindset is around all the different areas that we can use the resources that God's given us to try to further his cause.
Yeah, I like that. Point number 4 talks about giving with wisdom and joy. Many people give. However, I feel like a lot of it is kind of like I don't really want to give. I'll give because the Bible tells me to. I'll give because it's what others are doing. And maybe people have half of this equation where they give with wisdom because they know that what they're giving towards is important, but maybe they're lacking joy in their giving. Or maybe it's the opposite. People give with joy, but they're kind of just willy-nilly with it, so to speak.
The people who give with joy see the results. The person who gives out of obedience or, with a tight fist or like a clenched hand, they're giving in an irresponsible way. I'd be willing to bet.
Yeah.
There are far too many Christians that are just mailing the check into their church and they have no stewardship mindset. So they're going to stand in front of God and God's going to say, well, what had happened with all that money that went to your church? I noticed that your church's bank account just grew and the congregation didn't and you didn't do any outreach. What happened with all that money? Oh, I don't know. I just was obedient. I just gave the money to church like I'm supposed to. God said, wait a minute, that's my money. You're my steward. How dare you say that you're just going to give it away and not know where it went? So there is an obedience factor, but we talked about it. Control and fear go together, and we take God out of that equation. And also foolishness and faith can go together, where we take ourselves out of the equation. And it is our responsibility to be in the middle. And I believe the closer and longer that I work with the Lord, that I am responsible to know where all of those dollars are going and knowing that they're being used in a way that glorifies God and builds economic engines and furthers the kingdom in a way that God would want. Which is why it's difficult, candidly, for me to support large organizations where I don't have a personal relationship. Nearly every dollar that we give, I'm giving to a person because I can keep in touch with people and I can monitor the fruit in people's lives and I can even pour into people on a personal and spiritual level. And so I think most people who are giving with grief have no idea where that money's really going.
And then it almost creates a sour relationship with giving as time goes on that gets worse and worse.
Yeah, guilt giving.
Yeah. It's just like, well, I have to. I've got to do this. I got to give money here. And then that compounds into even more of a negative relationship, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. How would you experience the opposite effect where giving with joy grows your generosity and your joy when it comes to giving?
Well, God's kingdom is all about relationships. And when you give to somebody that has an anointing on their life to do something in particular, you're able to build relationship with that person, and you're able to co-labor with them, and you're able to enjoy the fruit that God is building in their life. And that's where the joy comes from, seeing something that they're creating with your support as you honor the Lord, that you get the joy of living with them. And yeah, I'm trying to come up with something clever with this whole guilt giving. It's like guilt giving and guesswork. Like that leads to some. There's got to be another G word that this is in the comments. If you get to think of it like a horrible word that is starts with a G that comes with guilt giving and guesswork.
Grouchiness.
Yeah, guilt giving, guesswork, and grouchiness. Let's put an amen on that. Yeah. And that's so true. Of course people feel like it's worthless or mindless because it is. What are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just,
You don't even think about your money that way. You don't just spend it with guilt, giving, and guesswork. You think about it, especially if you have money that you've been smart enough to retain what you've earned. I guarantee you're not just blindly writing a check to an organization with thousands of people and not having any idea where that money's truly going. So that's a hard word, but that's the truth.
Yeah. I mean, personal finance, usually people have somewhat of a plan of how much they have coming in, how much they're spending, what they're spending it on, paying off certain debts, whatever it is, like there's a plan behind it. And you know what is going on. Giving, it feels like people can just, willy-nilly just throw it out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. It's a good word. The fifth point he brings up is fostering collaborative partnerships.
I can't get over guilt, giving, guesswork, and grouchiness. Sorry, I have no idea what you just said. That's so good.
Oh man. The fifth point the author brings up in his core principles, core practices is fostering collaborative partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about what that means and how you've maybe approached that in your entrepreneurial world.
I think that there's kind of three levels of partnerships in God's kingdom. There's the mentorship partnership where you're learning from somebody who's ahead of you. There's the partnership horizontally where you're kind of partnering with people either financially or in an economic engine and business to move the ball forward. And then there's partnerships of people that you're trying to pour into and bring along with you. So that's how I view that. I mean, that's just the family of God. We all are a different part of the body, and we can equip and train others up. And, as we're wearing out, if we're the pointing finger, we're starting to get arthritis. We're pouring into that next pointing finger to really, help build God's kingdom and fill in our shoes as we go.
Yeah. Which of those three is the hardest for you? Is it to be under somebody and to learn and glean wisdom from them, to be on that level playing field, or to pour into, let's say the next generation?
I think initially listening to other people, because I'm really hard-headed and prideful, was like, why would I do that? And I think being mentored was one of the greatest gifts God's given me. And you have to be humble enough to receive it, especially the hard stuff, because that's where all the value is. The things that you don't want to hear, that's where all the growth is. When it's on that level playing field, that's pretty easy because it's kind of feels like it's benefiting you. And, especially if you're the leader, that helps because you get to do whatever you want. And then helping the next generation, there's nothing in it for you. So it can feel like a waste of time. But I feel like what is worth doing are those things that build other people around you, which is why mentors who value what they do. And so, over time, I have found joy in all of those things. Because without relationships, life's not really worth living.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's about the relationship, not necessarily just a partnership, but it's getting to have a relationship with that person.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk from Paul talking about co-laboring. Like, it's exciting to why is there power in other people's testimonies? Because it does something in us. It stirs something else up in us where we get to experience the God that we follow in the life of somebody else, and we get to kind of experience that joy and excitement, and we can then get to share it with others too.
That's good. Okay, point number 6: listen for spiritual guidance. What does that mean? Is that listening for the Holy Spirit to speak into your life? Is it listening through other people? Maybe God is speaking to you through others? Is it directly into the Bible? What is listening for spiritual guidance?
I'm going to try to see if I can come up with a story. Well, here's a story. This is a simple one, but it's a great example of doing good things for God that have no value. So 10 years ago, when I gave my life to the Lord, I was an early married. I had 2 kids, and we were attending a small kind of startup church plant of a larger church in town. And I guess I felt like, all right, I'm on fire for the Lord now. I want to go and teach these young, I want to go and share my experience and kind of what got me here. And so, hey, I'll go volunteer with the high school ministry. And, so what did I do? I, of course, did that. I was spending, whatever Wednesday nights with this group of kids, really freaking them out and probably oversharing like all the mistakes that I had made in a way that was not probably wise. And, in the meantime, stressing my wife out, who has new young children, because I'm gone Wednesday nights. And at the time I was traveling too. So I was gone and I come home, and now I'm gone more on Wednesday nights, doing something great for God. No fruit from that. I mean, like, I'm looking at the relationship, and I even felt awkward because it was like high school, and I was awkward in high school. So like now it's like if everything about it was horrible. I hate to say that. That's the truth. Like, I don't feel like there was any fruit. I felt horrible doing it. I didn't ask God. I was like, I'm going to go do something for you that was kind of negative for my marriage. So that's just a great example of going out and doing something great for God that he never asked you to do. Even getting ahead of what God is, even if God shows you maybe what he's doing, sometimes you could take the ball into your court. Like, a weird story in the Bible is when Abraham gets sent out to, kind of go to a new land. And along the way, he ends up in Egypt. Somewhere in there, God tells him he's going to be the father of many nations. He ends up in Egypt. He's afraid he's going to get killed because somehow his 75 or 80-year-old wife is hot still. And so he tells Pharaoh that it's his sister so that he doesn't get killed. And he ends up, making a lot of money. And then Pharaoh finds out, kicks him out, gets all his stuff. It's a super weird story on a lot of different levels. There's one level where it's like he didn't trust God. But a different way of looking at that possibly is like, what if he was trying to protect God's promise? He had no heir at that point. He had no son. So what if he had like a good intention of, oh, well, I can't die yet. I need to do anything possible or tell a half truth, because I guess she was kind of a half sister to him. I need to tell a half truth here so that I can protect what God's doing. It's like, that's not God's plan. And we can all obviously know that that was a very weird decision, and even weirder that he did it later. And I think his son did the same thing. So a lot of weird stuff in the Bible and in humanity. But the bottom line is that it's easy sometimes, even if God shows us what he's doing, for us to go on ahead of him without waiting and asking. And there's this worldly spirit of rush that is not of the kingdom. The cadence of the kingdom is a lot slower than what we're all used to, because there's no time constraint on it. It's eternal. And we're always trying to crunch everything into today and tomorrow and this week and this month and this year. And like, what can we accomplish and how can we define success more quickly? And so, I would say that going and doing good things for God is not what he's asking you to do. He's asking you to be available and to be close. And the closer and more available that you are to him, the more obvious. Jesus said, I don't do anything without the Father showing me what he's doing in advance. So even if God himself in human form was waiting for God to direct him in what to do, there's all sorts of, poor people that were sitting outside, like even the guy who the disciples healed. And I think Peter told him to get up and walk or whatever. Jesus had walked by that guy before. He was at the gate of the temple begging. Like, he walked by all sorts of beggars. He healed many. He didn't heal many. What if Jesus was here and loved everybody so much, why didn't he just go heal every single person on the planet while he was here? He didn't, because what honoring the Lord is, and who's in charge is, God the Father, and our job is to work with him, but wait on him.
Mm-hmm. Work with him, but wait on him.
Yeah.
That's that balance that we have to hold.
That's right.
Instead of trying to just focus on one or the other solely.
That's right.
Let's get it. Kind of tilting back towards the idea of stewardship. What does the world get right about money that the church is sometimes too quick to dismiss?
That for-profit enterprise is a valuable thing. I was reading in the Enduring Wealth book this concept that he talked about. The story is that he was going to go into this college ministry, and he just didn't feel like that's what he was supposed to do. He kind of was like following that path out of guilt because that was the holy thing to do. And there's a lot of pushback for him. I'm trying to think in my own life. I wish I was so holy that I had a story like that. But I think that the classic example is like, like volunteering at your church. Like, that's like more holy than like taking that time out and going into for-profit business and creating value. I think that the church has got that super mixed up. And I think the majority of our life, God created us to go and, yes, tell people about Jesus, but also go and create, given the raw materials in the world, and create order and beauty and opportunities for people to flourish. And the only way that the church exists is through people in for-profit business donating to them. So there should be way more value placed on what's happening, like God worked Monday through Saturday, than just on what's valuable for that hour and a half or 3 hours on Sunday during God's time of rest. Wow, that's real backwards. Think about that. The valuable work is the work that gets done during that time of rest. And the work that's dismissed as unvaluable is the same work that was happening the same time God was working. Church got that really mixed up. And there's another book that we're reading right now, where the author says that the majority of messages in church are to the minority of people's time. Yeah, that's the truth. And that's why there's a disconnect. And I think that is often why, people who God has put this desire to create in them one way or another, they feel out of place in church because they don't feel that they do things out of guilt. Like, well, maybe I'm supposed to be doing this because this is what everybody puts value around. Oh, going into ministry and whatever, volunteering, all these things, which, yes, is there goodness in that? Of course there is. But is that like the highest and best level? No, because guess what? We are a royal priesthood. So there you go. Every believer on the planet has the same God inside of them. There is one mediator between us and God, Jesus Christ. And so whatever our calling is our holy ministry. And yes, are we to steward it well? Of course. But there's all the things that the church has done of creating hierarchy and more importance around nonprofit work is nonsense.
It's good. Do you think the church would be better off if it got rid of the non-profit label?
Ooh, now you're really poking the bears. And my coffee's kicking in all at the same time. I think that at a minimum, here's a problem with the current church setup. Jesus specifically talked about not giving more honor to the person, the rich man at the table or in the setting, right? Just to give everybody equal standing. But that's not how churches stay alive. That's not how nonprofits stay alive. To stay alive by donations, and the biggest donors get the most love. It's just a fact, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. So how is that different than the kingdom of Israel? The temple tax was the same for everyone, which gave everyone equal standing as citizens of and members of the religion and the society. And so I think the church, in the effort to maybe do something that's more valuable to the nonprofit or be able to do more things, like it ends up kind of twisting things around and setting up for conflicts of interest that were never intended. So I think I am not all knowing. That is darn sure clear to everyone. But what I would say is I believe there are probably far too many nonprofits. And I believe that if churches would put more business people, economic engine oriented people on their boards, they would find ways to be more self-sustaining so they didn't have to go back to the membership. And maybe then the membership would be more inclined to give, because I'm not just giving to keep the lights on at this 20,000 square foot building. I'm actually able to give through this entity to someone else. And maybe we could create an economic engine where it is more of a temple tax system where all of our members gave the same amount because we don't really need their money. And now all the members are in equal standing. And then any gifts above and beyond that actually go to resource the kingdom. I think that we've got a lot to figure out in the church, certainly in the Western world. And I think if maybe it was Francis Chan, or somebody who's kind of saying like, well, how are some churches able to function on zero budget and others require a multi-million-dollar budget? Tell me the difference in the internal value of those two things. Probably not much. So I don't know. I have some bones to pick there, and it would require a lot of humility and risk on the part of the leadership in the American church to be able to look at things differently.
As you know, I worked for a nonprofit where a lot of the funding came from fundraising, right? What was scary about it, and I think is probably true for a lot of nonprofits, especially in the Christian world, roughly, 80 to 90% of the funds raised came from 5 to 10% of the donors.
Mm-hmm.
So you're relying on
that's always the case.
Right. You're relying on a small minority to continue to give to that. Well, what happens when that person gets upset about, maybe what you're doing or what somebody said, or that person passes away and now that money is gone, it goes elsewhere. That's such a challenge for nonprofits. You said earlier, it's, hey, we need you to give to keep the lights on, right? And that feels not as genuine or as, I don't want to say loving, but it creates a weird dynamic, I think, for the Christian. So just an interesting perspective, I think there. It's good.
Yeah. And for the person who's giving, when they come back and ask for the same amount every year, it does start to feel a little bit questionable. It's like, well, what happened with the other money? Why do what is being built here? Like, and I'm not saying there's not all something being built, because oftentimes there is, but also oftentimes there's not. And I don't want to be too high and mighty. I just think that in order for us to reach more of humanity and to reach more, to get, right now the Christian church, especially in the nonprofit space, in my opinion, is a big old echo chamber. Everybody on the boards are board members of other nonprofits, or maybe politicians, which is another nonprofit, or maybe, academics, which is another nonprofit. It's just this echo chamber. It's like, how can we go out and tap into the resources of people who are building economic engines? It's like, I don't know, man. I don't know if that's the right way. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like stewardship. So slaughter me in the comments. But
when has stewarding well cost you something that the world would tell you you should have kept?
Right now, we have these dashboards that show our productivity relative to other financial advisors in the United States who have similar sized businesses to us. And we used to be, it would be things like revenue, new assets, assets under management. Those are the kind of key metrics. And we'd get benchmarked, and there'd be quartiles, and it'd be like, just imagine like a gas tank, indicator on your car of how full it was. The more full it is, the better you're doing relative to your peer group. And we used to have those meters pretty full. And the decision that was made with Kerux last year, the decision not to sell the company 2 years ago. So think about it this way. The S&P 500 offers a 10% return annually. If I can't grow my business faster than 10% per year, it could be argued that I'm not being a good steward, because there is plenty of opportunity out there too. And so to add insult to injury, not only have we not grown by more than 10% a year since then, but also we made the decision to become a Christian company, which now we could serve theoretically fewer people, have a smaller pool of talent to pull from, and maybe by some people's estimation have a smaller impact on society for good. And going back to all those bar charts or whatever, those kind of like meters, a lot of those meters don't look so good anymore relative to our peer group. And so I think it would be easy to draw the conclusion that was bad stewardship, certainly from a modern wealth building perspective. But I think that also I've got a long-term vision, and it's not about selling the company tomorrow, and it is about trying to make impact. And impact, by the way, is not only financial. We talked about it. It's the lives of our clients, the lives of our team, the lives of the ministries that we support, and my family. Right? So it's people's lives. How can we have the biggest impact there, which is not only a financial mechanism.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Which could be an argument against my whole nonprofit tirade. And I see that, and I understand the value that is created eternally and spiritually in the work that nonprofits do. And I also take issue with the mindset and the echo chamber that's been created there. So it's good.
What is money promising us that only God can actually deliver?
I'm trying to come up with a good answer to that. I think that the basic answer to that is all of the things that money is advertised as providing: freedom, enjoyment, peace, sustenance, security, protection, comfort, fulfillment. Like all those, think of any, what would it be? Money provides. Noun? Is that it? I guess they're nouns. Peace is a noun. I have peace. Yes. Okay. Any noun that could be used to describe what money provides, that noun should be tied to what God is able to offer you. Because money is never going to be it. And you have the verse here, which is kind of my life's calling. Command those who are rich in the present age not to be arrogant and put their hope in wealth, which so quickly fades, but to put their hope in God, and to be generous and willing to share and store up treasure in heaven for a coming age, so that they can live life that's truly life. And that's it. We're not supposed to be arrogant and put our hope in money, because it does fail. But when we put our hope in God, we can live a life that's truly life. A life with all those nouns that are sold as what money provides.
Right.
I think they're nouns. Man, I'm just setting myself up. I was going to make a different joke, but I'm going to let that go.
Matthew talks about you can't serve two masters. You cannot serve money and God.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be one or the other. Feels like for a lot of people in the United States, even if they have a belief in God, they might be serving money as a master.
The first step to an eternal mindset is the realization that money is as much of a god in society today and more of a god than God himself. And that most Christians, I would argue, and I'm probably not too far off statistically since there's allegedly so many of them, put money as their god, not God as their God. And that's through their actions. And that's why they're unhappy, because a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways.
Was there a moment that you realized you were holding money like you owned it rather than as a steward?
What's so funny about that is this whole revelation for me didn't happen like 20 years ago, and I've just been living this glorious Christian life ever since. This is pretty recent. We started doing Instagram posts about 18 months ago. So that would have been like the fall of 2024. And so I'm coming up with trying to content and trying to share similar things that we're sharing here, but in a shorter form setting. And yeah, I got all these great ideas about God's economy. I'm going to walk through the Bible and talk about, what I know about money and what God says about it, this and that. So it's so funny. I'm talking about, hey, here's what God says about money. Here's what God says about money. And Jenna, who runs our operations, said, what would be a great topic is stewardship versus ownership. And I was like, ugh. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't there. I'm like, stewardship. And somehow I hadn't even heard it. It hadn't even occurred to me. It was kind of ironic because I was using God's, and this is probably common, using God's principles that, yes, do foster wealth building, but using them to build for myself. And, man, that was like I'm not ready for that one, And so that was the beginning. I'm standing right outside the door here in the room when she said that to me, and that was not long ago. And candidly, that was after that was after we became Kerux. So it's you're on this journey, but you don't realize how evil you are. You don't realize how fleshly you truly are. And I'm going to be swallowing, I'm sure, words that I've said on the show 6 months from now when God shows me, where I'm really at. But yeah, ownership versus stewardship. That's a deep one.
Well, it almost feels like the foundation of what we're talking about here is if you view money and finances from an ownership perspective versus a stewardship perspective, then the rest of these things, adopting an eternal mindset, converting earthly assets into kingdom capital, giving with wisdom and joy, they almost feel combative if you're an owner, right? Why would I want to give away my money? It's a really strangling narrative to think that you are the owner of all this and therefore you have to keep it and have to manage it, rather than this is all God's and I'm going to live with open hands and he's going to do work through me, right?
I'll tell you a story. Yesterday I was talking to one of my team members. That was our kind of one of our scheduled check-ins. And he was really concerned about AI and the future of our industry and how he felt well, what happens when AI is able to do everything that we do for clients today for $10 a month? And, I started kind of saying, okay, well, play that out. What's the worst case scenario? Let's just say the worst case scenario is Kerux dissolves, no longer viable anymore. You've got a new job somewhere else. The question is, will that be better for you? Will God have given you something better than you found out? And his answer was probably. And I was like, that is what you need to explore. Because if at a core level, we don't believe God is who he says he is and will do what he says he will, then that is where all the instability lies and is the door that is shut between us becoming an owner and a steward. Because a steward puts their faith in the master to provide and look out for their best interest. An owner has to watch out for their own back. And there's a lot of Christians, including myself, we have to go back to that probably at the root cause of the worst case scenario. And we need to make sure that we have to prayerfully get from probably to definitely. That becomes easier to do over time.
Okay. If you could hand your kids and instill in them one principle about stewardship, what would it be?
The number one thing that prevents us from being good stewards in any area of our life, in my opinion, is us wanting something that once we get it, we're going to be happy. More time, more money, more talent, more recognition, more of something. There's something that we are seeing or striving for that if we get, we're going to be happier. The most important thing to know about stewardship is that the goal in life is relationship and connectivity and intimacy with Jesus Christ. Triune God, God the Father, Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ. Like that is where all fulfillment and happiness and flourishing lies. And so if you're striving for anything other than that, materially or status or reputation or whatever, that is going to get in the way of being the steward that God calls you to be. Because maybe he doesn't have good plans for you. And maybe you won't be as happy because you won't get as much money as you want in order to make you happy. And maybe you won't have as hot of a wife as you think you need. And just keep going down the list, right? Maybe you won't have discretionary time that you can go and enjoy a life of leisure, which is where happiness lies versus what he's got you doing now. Like that is the central issue. If you can pursue relationship with Jesus Christ as the most important access point to happiness and worth and success and fulfillment, then, you can be a steward. But if you're chasing something else, it's going to be difficult.
It sounds to me like having contentment in your life, being content with what God has provided you with.
Yeah, but contentment for a high performer sounds so lame. Because don't you want excitement? Don't you want challenge? Don't you want adventure? All of those are found in Jesus. So contentment, yes, but also all the fun stuff.
It's good.
That's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about your faith and your finances connected, check us out at keruxhq.com or look in the show notes and you can sign up for our monthly newsletter where we talk about the markets, stewardship, and all things finance.